This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Okay, it is crazy brilliant that in Severance's opening scene in just 90 seconds, just look at this is nuts, 90 seconds in, not even, and Helly is already trying to escape Lumen. Her plot has started, and her key personality trait of defiance of authority that has been established, that is active. Mark's initial defining character trait of his innocent conformity to Lumen, that is also established and active. We have connected these two characters' most important character relationship in the whole show that is already underway. We've also just created a scene that is multifaceted enough that we'll return to it and deepen our experience of it before the hour is out. There's already so much more to dig into in just these moments from so many different angles. We've also christened like 5 different major symbols that will be used throughout the show, many of which I talked about in my previous video. Possibly most importantly, we've conveyed the primary emotional experience of the story, being oppressively controlled physically and mentally by an awkwardly corporate, emotionally vacant, disembodied voice, and that voice has asked the central thematic question of the entire story.
Who are you?
This is more than some movies accomplish in the first hour. In Severance, 90 seconds, and all of that has been accomplished. And then you crank that up to the full 5 minutes of the scene, and we have sampled the full emotional range of the show, like a dozen different nuanced emotions, from confusion and anger and fear all the way to humor and compassion and appreciation. And not just the range, we've also sampled the emotional depth of the show with the first and last survey questions. Even in this very limited space, the scene takes its time to linger on those emotions, really feel them. We've also snuck in references to lore. We've also gotten a firm idea of so many core dynamics of the show. We've kind of established how Mark and Helly interact. We've also established the nature of hierarchies in Lumen, and also just how the work cycle operates to control people in Lumen. We see this exact type of control over and over again. Do this totally confusing, overly formal, arbitrary thing that you don't understand, but you will get rewarded in the end. And we've even gotten a taste of what that reward, what the good in the show really is. Why is being trapped so bad? What is being withheld? Human connection. That is the reward. Severance is severance from your identity and your life, but the reason why that's relevant is that you were cut off from relationships, which will obviously be a central motif of the season in multiple ways, and presumably the whole show for as many seasons as it continues. 5 minutes, and we establish all of that, probably more honestly. Again, that is more than some movies and TV shows accomplish in their entire runtime, much less 5 minutes. It is so efficient, and each element it introduces hits really hard, it's compelling, it feels rich, it forms a cohesive experience. So my question is, how does one do this? If I want to write a kick-ass opening like this in a story of my own, how do I even begin to craft a scene that does this much? And you know what, before we can even get to an answer, I just want to make sure this question is framed strongly in its proper context. I realized when I first started making this video that it'd be very easy to just go, okay, here's 10 to 20 things I love about this opening, and then just assume that people who watch it, writers who watch it, will be able to apply it to their first scenes, but I cannot do that because that is not where people are. The writer I really need to be talking to here, the one who is struggling with beginnings, most likely they will not be at the point where they can apply these tips or any tips to their first scene, because chances are they have no idea what their first scene even is. This is how I often feel when I write a story. Lots and lots of writers get stuck right away because they have no idea where to start. They have their story idea, and they're just sitting in front of a blank page with no idea what their first scene is, no idea what their first scene should be. I've been there, I'm sure a lot of you have been there. The other common situation, you do get started, you get like halfway into your story, and you realize that you started in completely the wrong place. Figuring out what that first blank page needs to be filled with, that is a very, very difficult decision. And if you think it's simple, just start at the beginning, tell me, what is the beginning? Are you referring to an actual real starting point in a story idea that you can indicate to me? Or does the very idea of start at the beginning just crumble apart in your brain as soon as you think into it even a little bit? Like, what is the beginning of Severance's story? Shouldn't it be Mark's birth? He's the protagonist. Or maybe it's PD escaping? Isn't that the inciting incident? Or maybe you start here in this scene, but with Mark's perspective, start from the beginning of what actually is happening here chronologically, start with Mark going to work. Or maybe start with Helly's Audi getting severed. Or no, the real beginning was Mark's wife dying. Or was it Mark meeting his wife? I mean, Severance getting invented, I mean, that was the actual beginning. Or is it Kier Egan starting Lumen? If you're trying to find the earliest thing chronologically or structurally in your plot, chances are you're going to have a hard time finding that because it's not something that you find, it's something that you decide. You get to set the scope of your own story. So how do you do that? And also, does the chronological beginning of your story or structural beginning of your story necessarily have anything to do with what your opening scene is? Is that the same question? Actually, take a moment and think this through. Think about your favorite stories. Do they open on the first thing that happens in the plot? Chances are, I would say over 50% of them don't. Lord of the Rings starts with a cultural anthropology essay. You take a movie like Forrest Gump, we got 2 full minutes of a feather floating around aimlessly. The Last of Us starts with a scene that takes place decades before the plot starts, with 0 characters from the actual story. X-Men starts in Auschwitz with the main villain's inciting incident. Up famously starts with a whole little beautiful sequence that is a self-contained story on its own. What is that? 2 favorite movies of mine, Let Me In and Mission Impossible 3. They start with scenes from smack in the middle. You have Fight Club and like a lot of movies that start with the end of the story. Big Trouble in Little China, another favorite of mine, starts starts from after the end of the story. Spider-Verse 2, I still have absolutely no idea when this trippy monologue of Gwen's happens in the movie. Is it the beginning? Is it in the end? Is it just before the end? Is it after the end? Or let's say I want to make a D-Day movie. Do I build up to D-Day like a climax, or do I build up to it like it's a first plot point, or do I have that as my first scene? Or actually, it's the second scene. What's going on there? Or you know what? Maybe I shouldn't start my movie with a scene at all. Maybe I start it like this. Or maybe I start it like this. Or maybe like this.
Yeah. That went well.
First scenes, this is a big topic, this is an important topic, and I feel like half the guidance I see about it is about finding your inciting incident, which, as we said, is not necessarily relevant to your first scene, and then another chunk of it is just kind of saying conflict, or start with the character being active, and of course it's not nearly enough for me, it's not nearly enough for you, so I want to learn all I can from this brilliant first scene of this brilliant show, but in doing so I also want to use the scene to find a framework of just how to think about openings. How do you choose what to show first? If first scenes are not the beginning of the story, if they're not the inciting incident, what are they exactly? And then after that, in that context, what tools can we use, what tools can we glean from this first scene, this genius piece of writing, to strengthen our first scenes? So to zoom in once again to Severance, to this scene, it starts with this efficiency that we talked about, but efficient in doing what exactly? If you look at just what this scene is, Helly wakes up severed, she tries to escape, she has to do some awkward corporate nonsense that ends up being really horrifying and dystopian, and then it ends with her finding connection. What we are witnessing here is the entire story of Severance in miniature. This intro is structured as a microcosm of the story, and what a microcosm will deliver if done right is a sampler of what the story has to offer. If the story as a whole can deliver these things, then a good miniature version will have all the same machinery to produce all that same good stuff as well. And I think both these concepts are very actionable. They can both be very effective models or guideposts for crafting a potent first scene. Because if you think about what a sampler is, like a food sample, a sample is just enough quantity to produce the quality. So if you think of like a food sampler plate, that's what we're doing here with this first type of scene. A sampler plate is not trying to accomplish what a meal accomplishes, and the way it uses the components of a meal is completely different. There's not going to be the depth of experience of a full meal, and the sampler plate knows that it won't convey the full depth of experience. It's not trying to, it adjusts what's on the plate accordingly, and it's not avoiding depth either. It's not giving you a piece of cheese, but nope, that's too much flavor, make it less. It's limiting the cheese down to the sample size of everything else on the plate. It's not going to be not enough, and you get to enjoy whatever you get. So you can think of this type of first scene, what we're seeing in Severance, in the same way. I'm going to say something obvious here, but what makes the writing of opening scenes inefficient and bloated is, surprise, surprise, trying to deliver too much. Yes, your story has a great plot, your story has great characters, and yes, you should be impatient to get to them, but you will get to them later on once we have a full meal to work with multiple courses. With our sampler plate, we are not trying to cram as much of the story onto the plate as possible. We're not trying to cram as much of the character onto the plate as possible. Give them one bite, and then move on to the next sample. That is sampler plate standard procedure. That is what you gotta do. And then the mechanism by which you are providing the samples, the structure of the plate maybe, I don't know if this metaphor is still working, is your story microcosm. Severance is a story about severed employees trying to escape from under the thumb of their dystopian corporate overlords. You could have an opening scene that shows the beginning of that process. Start with a scene about this severance procedure. Or you could have a scene about what prompted Mark to get the procedure. Or you could start with something about Lumen, but knowing that they are a show about severed employees trying to escape Lumen, they started with a scene that is about a severed employee trying to escape Lumen. It is Helly doing Helly stuff, and that's also the point. If you start with an introduction scene that is giving a lot of background, but is a lot different from just the nature of the rest of the story, it might not be as straightforward to express characters doing their loud and proud core character stuff. The story as a whole, doesn't matter if it's in miniature or not, will be great at expressing what the story does. So just as far as ease, if you want a simple vehicle to express characters shining as themselves, a microcosm will work perfectly for that. It doesn't matter if Helly's trying to escape Lumen as a whole, or just a room, she can still fully do her whole Helly thing of, I don't know or care what's happening, I'm gonna laugh at authority, I'm gonna be defiant, I'm gonna do what I want. And it doesn't matter if Mark is leading the macro data refinement team as a whole, or doing this one-off orientation, that same machinery will be able to showcase Mark being his same naive, innocent, mostly conforming, but secretly compassionate self. It'll be just as efficient at doing that on the smaller scale. And it's the same thing with plot. Severed characters want to escape Lumen, all the challenges they face in the big plot they can face here too. They can do the cold, disembodied admin overlord voice, complete with the inhuman speaker box, demanding awkward corporate BS that's dumb but also mysterious and kind of eerie, all while depriving us of connection and keeping us trapped. And if we're doing the same plot in sampler form, we should also be able to access all the same emotions in sampler form. form. And we see that we can. We got confusion, insecurity, humor, anxiety, desperation, resignation, incredulity, sadness, existential horror, compassion, and we should also be able to access the same themes, the same tone, ideally the same symbols. Anything noteworthy your story has to offer in its big version, you should ideally be able to express through your sampler plate microcosm as well. And then also, side note, I don't want you to think that I'm saying sampler plate as like a specifically superficial thing. No, Severance can and does deepen the scene greatly in multiple ways, and that can be part of the sampler. You can give a sample of your story's depth. So that is what Severance is doing broadly. Once you have your overall story, find a way to boil it down to a little miniature version of itself, tack that onto the beginning in a like cohesive way, connect it to the plot somehow, make it the inciting incident of some arc, or just find a segue, whatever it is, and then let the full power of your story do its work, express all the different amazing story elements your story has to offer, just in sample form. Just enough quantity to produce each quality. So that's on a broad scale. On more detailed scale, the structure Severance chooses to do their sampler plate with is genius. And I'm referring specifically to the survey here. It's just so brilliant, because that is a structure where they can basically do anything they want writing-wise. You can bring up any topic with zero need for coherent segues between them. And then we can dwell on it for like 2 seconds, and then we can move on. You can frame the thing with whatever progression you want. You can do whatever pacing you want. You can play with whatever emotions you want. It's just so versatile. And even on top of that, it's just already bursting with the perfect kind of corporate BS flavor. It's something that Mark can try to force Helly to do that she can rebel against, and he can calmly, obediently keep pushing her to do. We can establish that dynamic, and it can be easily tied to Helly's goals of escaping and Mark's goals of following the rules as like something he needs to do. And then it's also 2 people involved or multiple people involved. We can find depth and switch into the other person's perspective later. It's part of company procedure, so we can refer to past orientations like Mark's and find depth that way. And then also a simple but vital function of the survey is that it can end. We can end the scene and feel like we had a whole complete little arc, and that's going to make us more engaged once we decide to keep watching. Giving your audience space after a hook like this to disengage and then re-engage, that decision is going to have like the subtle oomph behind it. There's going to be sticking power to that because it's personal volition, is their choice to keep watching. So, okay, to take a tiny step back here, what I'm describing might sound really complex or intimidating to craft from scratch, but that's really just because Severance does such a thorough job of giving a sample of every little thing and doing it so efficiently. It does not need to be this crazy good. It can do much less and be much less efficient, and it's still going to really shine just from the structure. 2 fantastic examples of this that are much more basic are Indiana Jones 1 and The Matrix. Indiana Jones, broadly as a full story, is about going on adventures to find ancient treasures, and the first scene is a little adventure to find a little ancient treasure. And by using the structure, the machinery, the character and story were designed for, we see all of Indy's best traits easily on full display. We get all the classic Indiana Jones daring stunts and perilous traps and clever puzzles and shocking betrayals and terrifying escapes. Everything we love, and it's all very simple and straightforward. The Matrix is an even simpler example because it's true that what The Matrix is known for is definitely the philosophy and Plato's cave allegory and all kinds of deep existential stuff, but factually, it is a movie where people in dark, stylish outfits have crazy mind-bending martial arts fights and get chased through the normie world by agents. That's where a lot of the movie is. And the philosophy stuff is also kind of hard to give a real thorough sampler of anyway, so let's just make a sampler plate with the mind-bending action and the chase sequences and the coolness, and that'll be it. And it totally works. It's great. We do get a great taste of the flavor of the movie and the type of badass characters we see in it. We get to see the cool, calm martial arts master attitude. We get to see the fear and overcoming fear.
Get up, Trinity. Just get up. Get up.
And yeah, we actually do end up getting a taste of the depth as well, and it's in a very interesting way, because it's even more samply than the Severance example. Severance gives us a taste directly of the existential confusion and horror. It tells us exactly what central question it's dealing with. What does The Matrix do? It starts with just showing us imagery that powerfully evokes a sense of mystery and something deeper. And it's not just pretty abstract pictures either. We are shown that it is part of the story somehow. And then also it introduces a couple things that will be the deeper concepts.
It's impossible.
Morpheus believes he is the one.
And at this point, none of that sounds like it's anything much different from normal sci-fi fantasy stuff, but it might already be starting to feel like something more, since it's combined with a sense of mystery from earlier, and also the sense that there are people who know what's going on and there are people who don't.
I sent 2 units. They're bringing her down now.
No, Lieutenant, your men are already dead.
Okay, so it's time for the ad. And I know the ad content balance in your life can be a tough topic, so have I got a treat for you. Just sit back, take a deep breath, and... Hi, welcome to the Squarespace ad experience. My name is schnee.business. Okay, actually, I'm in a Value Village. I didn't own a white shirt, so we're not doing this for the whole ad. Okay, so this is a video about writing your first scene, which means I'm talking to a lot of writers here, or storytellers more broadly, artists, filmmakers, creatives of all kinds. And for people in the creative industries, having a website that's a central hub for everything you do is just a huge asset. And Squarespace is the perfect platform to easily build that website with no web design experience necessary. Squarespace offers a huge variety of designs and templates so that you can feel like you have an online presence that fits you, that fits your style, your taste, and most importantly, your business needs. You can post any kind of content you need to, videos, blogs, podcasts. You can have subscriptions, you can have stuff behind a paywall if you want, you can have a donation button if you want, all super easy to set up. Building everything is totally simplified so you can just click the stuff you like, and 30 minutes later you have a fully functioning website, and all the other common online needs you hear about, you're covered there too. You can buy a domain, you get access to all sorts of SEO tools, you can keep track of analytics. This is a platform that just makes it all very straightforward and very simple to use. So go to squarespace.com/schnee for a free trial, and when you are ready to launch, use offer code SCHNEE to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Back to the video. Okay, so our original question was not just about this scene. It was, can we use this brilliant first scene to give us a general understanding, or really an overall framework to think about first scenes as a whole? And specifically a framework that takes into account the seeming lack of any pattern for what great first scenes are. And then also a framework that will deepen the rest of the lessons the scene has to offer us. And yes, I think looking at the sampler plate idea, which to be honest is a very specific form of a first scene, definitely will not work for every story, but looking at what this does do, we can extrapolate pretty effectively, and I think that fundamental framework becomes really clear. So when I think sampler plate, and then I think about Star Wars, and then I think about all these other examples I mentioned earlier, all these scenes that start in different random places in the story, or not even in the story, or whatever other crazy stuff, I think the perfect allegory that describes the commonality among all these examples, which doesn't just get to the heart of what a first scene is, but will help you, writer watching this, you who's staring at this blank page, stuck, it'll help you discover where and when and how to start. The idea is this. Don't think of it as a first scene, think of it as a flagship scene. Flagship is the metaphor here, because you are going to war to conquer the next hour, or 2.5 hours, or 6 hours, or 10 hours of your audience's attention. And these first moments of your military offensive, your goal is, like Matthew Perry style, to make such a freaking impressive show of force that the other side just throws up their hands, doesn't even put up a fight, just, okay, yeah, sure, take it. I want you to have it. Do me a personal favor, take the pen, and okay, yeah, I'm being metaphorical, Bob, but it's real what the metaphor corresponds to. To some degree, everyone, when we see something new, we have our defenses up, we have our guard up, we're a bit skeptical. Why should I like your thing? Maybe I don't wanna. I am this close to changing the... I guess no one changes channels anymore. I am this close to clicking off, so go ahead and make me stay. I dare you. And you, as the storyteller, you gotta fight them. You gotta make a show of force. You gotta make those defensive lines turn tail and run. Take that juicy time commitment from them. It is a lot like mounting an attack. And I want to differentiate here. I'm not saying hook. The concept of hook, it's not a bad allegory either, but for a first scene, I think this is a much more comprehensive metaphor. Because a flagship does not achieve its effect by luring and withholding. It does so by demonstrating the best of what is coming. But also, it sounds like I'm just talking about sampler plate. This is not limited to sampler plate at all. Sampler plate is a variety. You can also just put your best foot forward, whatever your best foot is, just one gigantic foot instead of a bunch of little feet, and go for just power in that one story element, or a few story elements that you think is going to really, really shine. Star Wars is this monumentally epic, heroic adventure tale. Can you imagine if we started with sampling Luke?
Toshi Station to get the power.
What we get with Star Wars is not all the different elements of Star Wars, it is the full impact of all of it at once. That epic emotion, that is the flagship. That is one of the best things about the Star Wars experience, so we lead with that. And yeah, also we add in a couple more things. We can add in the mythical feel with a long time ago, far, far away. We do have an opening crawl to work with, and we can use that to frame the experience as like being in an exciting dramatic period in history, and we can throw in like a dozen space opera keywords that help evoke the whole epic adventure emotion, and that is more than enough. That is better than any sampler could do for the story. Mission Impossible 3, as I mentioned before, if you haven't seen it, go see it. Just a really solid action movie. It starts like this.
We've put an explosive charge in your head. The rabbit's foot, where is it?
What I gave you.
I'm gonna count to 10. You're gonna tell me where the rabbit's foot is, or she dies.
So this scene is from the middle of the movie, which doesn't sound like it makes that much sense. But this kind of high-stakes, extreme action movie tension, that is what the whole Mission Impossible experience is about. So it literally doesn't matter if it's from a random point in the movie. Finding a potent and relevant scene like that and making that our first scene, that can be our flagship. With The Last of Us, there's a lot of reasons that they start like this, a lot of thematic reasons, but forgetting all of that, just the fungus zombies concept, that is super unique. That is super fresh, and the whole fact that they share about how with rising global temperatures is a terrifyingly real possibility, that hits hard. So we don't even need Joel and Ellie. That can be our flagship. And yes, the Matrix, as we mentioned, the allegory and all the deep ideas are great, but show the audience just the Trinity kick, and you will see white flags. I surrender, take all of my attention span, it's yours. This looks so awesome. And keep in mind that these are all particularly hard-hitting flagships that on their own can achieve total surrender. But the other part of the metaphor is the flagship starts the war and then there's a war afterwards. So you don't need to make the scene the be-all end-all, just hit them with something that is uniquely your story. Whether it's an animation style or a quality of animation, whether it's a very different villain backstory, or whether it's Howl's Castle, or even something quiet like a really meaningful symbol. And that will be a great choice for opening a great story. And the story, aka the army, is ultimately what will get that surrender to happen in a real way. This opening bang is just an opening bang. It doesn't need to be a one-ship navy, it just needs to do its job as a flagship. Going back to Severance for a second, I watched this opening scene with quite a few different groups of people for the first time, and yes, it is a sampler for a lot of good stuff, but the moment that gets a reaction out of everyone, my favorite line in the whole scene, is after the supremely eerie first few seconds of Helly waking up sprawled out on the table with a mysterious voice asking us deep existential questions, we get this.
Hi there. You on the table? I wonder if you'd mind taking a brief survey.
That line consistently gets a reaction. It gets laughs, and it's not like, haha, that's funny laughs. It is, what the f was that line laughs? It is, I'm officially paying attention laughs. Severance has a lot going for it, but what is utterly unique and just wonderful, what I would call its flagship, is its tone. And that line just smacks you in the face with it. Full dose of awkward, absurd, corporate, mundane, chaotic, all bundled together. It just throws everyone off in the best way. So the particular advice here is think about what is uniquely your story and craft a scene to demonstrate to your audience through this uniqueness that your story as a whole will be a unique experience. If you've never seen action like this, you might want to surrender the next 2 hours of your attention span, because I'm going to show you a lot more cool stuff like this. If you've never seen a D-Day depiction that's this realistic, then you should know that you're in for a uniquely realistic depiction of wartime as a whole like you've never seen before. If you have never seen Nathan Fillion's glorious butt, well, I got good news for you. You will definitely see it again in this episode. So, the flagship idea, that is the big overarching principle here, to now get into individual lessons, the second tool Severance gives us from within this framework is this.
Who are you?
If the opening scene is your flagship, the opening of your opening scene is like your flag. The more precise term I came up with for this is an echoer. The first moments of your story will echo throughout your entire story. That is just how our brains work. We use the beginning to qualify the whole. So that's why a lot of movies will use the beginning of the beginning to state a theme.
Are you watching closely?
No, son. Never. The blood stays on the blade.
And that last one demonstrates how it's not just words, but really any experience in the beginning will echo throughout the story. Dune as a whole would take on a much different feeling if it was like a dweeby human voice saying that line in American accented English. Instead of eerie otherworldly language and voice, that eerie otherworldly vibe echoes throughout the whole rest of the story. Just like we mentioned with Star Wars, the mythical feel, the epic opening music, emotions like this echo throughout the whole movie. So Severance smartly selects its core thematic question as its echoer, but it also gives it emotional flavor by pairing it with this eerie, disturbing image and making it a cold, disembodied voice. That question, along with all those feelings, will echo throughout the entire experience of Severance. And this is also related to an important limitation of what the first scene should and shouldn't be about, and this is the third major lesson here. There would be a massive difference in Severance if the first scene had been about grief and Mark's wife dying, or if it had been about Petey's escape, or if it had been about the experience of Mark going to work on the first day, all of which is chronologically first and maybe structurally first, but it would feel wrong because the first scene has to be about Severance, because that is what the whole show is about. I think this is why Peter Jackson did not start the Lord of the Rings movies with concerning hobbits, but with it began with the forging of the Great Rings, because Lord of the Rings. And also, I know that this is how Arcane chose this beginning, because they tell us straight out, listen to Amanda Overton here, who, by the way, fun fact, was also a writer on Severance.
I'm quite proud of the cold open too, the whole beginning of the season with the bridge. The cold open used to be the cold open from episode 3 when Silco was drowning. That's a lovely poetic image, right? But it wasn't telling the story of the series, which is these two sisters being torn apart.
And it's the same thing with the X-Men 1 opening. Magneto is the main villain. That seems like an odd place to start. His origin is not part of this movie's plot, but this is a story about violent prejudice concerning identity and how humans respond to that, or how mutants respond to that, rather. So as distant as this may sound in a superficial sense, it is very fitting on a realer level to open the story in Auschwitz. It also has to be Magneto in the scene. It has to be a mutant. It cannot be a random Jew. It can't be Great Uncle Schnee, as much as I'm sure he would have been thrilled to be an X-Men. And that's lesson number 4 here. We touched on this earlier. but it has to be connected to your story. It has to operate as a lead-in in some way, which is also just like the flagship metaphor. It has to be your nation's flagship. It has to be your military. It has to be leading the rest of your army or navy. It's just going to be a smoother campaign if the offensive moves along efficiently from the first step to the next steps. Even with first scenes that start with the end, you'll see those scenes often taking great measures to be very integrated into the meat of the story.
You leave Jack Burton alone.
And then they will often end with a smooth transition to the actual start of the plot.
See? That was nothing. But that's how it always begins. Very small.
And that is what we see with Severance 2. This is a piece of advice you hear a lot with short stories, but it can be adapted to any story. With short stories, they say start as close to the end as possible. With any story, it might not be as close to the end, but start as close to big things happening as possible. And that's another major reason why we don't need to see Petey escape or Mark losing his wife, and it's why we're starting with Helly, because the story may have started earlier, but it really gets going with Helly's rebellion efforts. It gets going not with Petey's departure, but with Mark learning of Petey's departure, and that destabilizing him, shaking his loyalty to the company, and creating a fresh need for connection, which ends up being connection with Helly, and that starts with this scene. And yes, even with this lesson, remember these are tools, not rules. You can absolutely start from a much more distant point if you want to, like The Last of Us, as long as there's a good segue or a strong sense of connection. It's just a cost-benefit analysis. How many people are going to be thrown off by the jarring segue between two scenes that seemingly have nothing to do with each other? But the tool is, if you can have your frontline troops close on the heels of your flagship, go ahead and do that. If not, just have some connection. Moving on, next lesson, let me introduce this by asking you, what is your experience when you've conquered land before? What is your preferred method? Me personally, I like the common strategy of, hey there, yeah, here's this big army of mine, but you and me, we're already friends, right? We're not conquering you, you're part of us already, and you know that, you've always known that. Scott Pilgrim vs. the World opens with not just this 8-bit Universal logo, but with this sound. And also with this sound.
22.
And those are not just retro video game style sounds, those are actual sounds from Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, which is one of my favorite games, and hearing that definitely made me go, oh, this is something I already like. How about that? And you can't always do that exactly, and you wouldn't want to always do that exactly, but this is where relatability comes in. And relatability good, that is obviously not a new concept, but I think within this framework, it's much clearer why relatability should be a priority this early on. If you present a situation like a young woman who's trapped in a room and wants to get out, that is not a situation where I have to like sit in moral deliberation to figure out where I stand. Automatically, by instinct, I'm like, yes, this is a situation where I am on her side. I hate seeing people trapped, I hate being trapped, I like defying oppressive authority. Those dispositions I've had long before I started watching this show, so who I am is already aligned with Helly in the scene. So this is all a background to the fifth tool, which I'm making sure is more developed than just prioritize relatability. I think it's fair to formulate it in this way. Give your audience someone to root for, someone who they want to win, and maybe also someone who they want to lose. And it does not have to stay that way. Siding with Helly in this scene, that does last. Siding against Mark in the scene, that does not last very long at all. But providing sides for us that makes it feel like the activation cost has already been paid. I don't need to proactively get off my butt and invest. I am already invested because of the person who I am.
Because of when I was born.
And in a similar vein, I think some basic tools to implement here, which Severance does beautifully, are get to conflict as soon as possible and get to agency as soon as possible. These two qualities help us in the same way as the siding with and against phenomenon. Conflict and agency gets us on board. It helps us not just invest, but feel like we're auto-invested. And like we mentioned in the very beginning of this video, in seconds we have a conflict that we can take sides on, and in seconds we have agency too. The story leaves ample room for that. And just as a side note that I could probably make a whole video about, the agency does not need to be real agency. Severance is the absolute master of this. It is full of characters feeling like they have agency when they really don't. Helly here at this point arguably has zero real agency, but even the way they let her wander around the table, the option they give her of ignoring the speaker for a while, the way she tries to get through the door, and then of course later, this is getting further than the opening scene per se, but her throwing the speaker at Mark, her asking to leave 3 times and being allowed to leave even though she really has no agency there at all, watching her catapult herself at the door, all that feeds our hunger for agency, whether or not it's real. So fake agency, great tool to use. I would argue that we care more about the feeling of agency than actual agency. Like I said, could be a whole topic unto itself. But moving on to the final lesson here, the one I think is the most pivotal quality to prioritize. When your flagship arrives in the enemy harbor with your army behind it, what you need in that moment is a clear, simple battle plan or a clear list of demands for surrender. And similarly, in your flagship scene, what you need is a clear, simple structure. A first scene that is hard to follow can be poison. Even if it is showcasing your story's best unique strengths, even if it is a sampler, even if once you cut through the mess it is relatable, a first scene that shows a clear path the audience can follow will give way more access to everything good that your scene has to offer. If your story has a lot of world building stuff, do not immerse us in that in an overwhelming way. Do not make what needs to happen in the scene super contingent on a totally new world building concept that you're just going to leave the audience to try to understand in the moment. Even if the concept itself in your mind when you think about it is a simple thing, don't couch it in a shell that we need to work to understand before we're on board with a character or the conflict or what's happening in the scene. No, what you want is a clear path to follow, escape from the agents, dead rabbits versus the natives, two sisters walk through a desolate battlefield, or here's the life story of two childhood sweethearts, or here's a scary Nazi trying to find the hidden Jews, or a cool adventurer tries to find the ancient treasure, or tell me where the MacGuffin is or she dies, or Aziz Light, or D-Day, or let me out of this room, nope, not until you take my survey. Severance as a story is loaded to the brim with complexity. There are parts that are very hard to digest, but the first morsel they give us, they go through such efforts to make sure that that piece goes down super smoothly. Even within the scene, the survey, which is where we start to get complexity, that comes last. We, through our identification with Helly, we use our agency to agree to engage with that complexity, and that's only after we get the really clear path of let me out of this mysterious room. That part is super easy to follow, and when they do present the concept of severance, they do not overwhelm me with all the details. They give us a part that even if we don't know why, we totally get the what. We have a lot of space to just let that sink in. We can follow it all very easily, but also the scene does not depend on us understanding this. We still get that Helly is trapped in a room, we get why she's uncomfortable, even if we don't understand the world-building concept behind it. And we can see with this example, you don't need to shy away from complexity or world-building. Audiences love that and want that, but do not make the scene contingent on understanding that. Give a path, really any path, that the audiences can hold the railing and follow along, know where it's going just by the structure alone. I don't need to understand what the Matrix is and what the agents are to follow Trinity's escape. I don't need to know any history or anthropology of South America to follow Indy finding the monkey. I don't need to understand the class dispute of Piltover and Zahn in order to follow the sisters on the bridge. And then later on, eventually I either will get far enough into the story that I pick up on the complex stuff by osmosis, or I'll be invested enough that I'll be willing to put in the effort to understand all that stuff. And okay, granted, let's say that you hear what I'm saying, sounds very reasonable, but you just can't do it with your scene. The first scene you want to do, it just needs the complexity. In that case, we can actually look to the examples that we have, and we can see that when the opening is explaining high learning curve world building stuff, what do these great stories do? They just unabashedly info dump. And yeah, maybe that will sound to you like it's against the rules, but if it's complex enough info, then yeah, tell don't show here if it means prioritizing clarity. Don't try to like hint at it and hope the audience picks it up. Give the audience lots of space to understand, be as concise as you can while still explaining the full thing you need to explain, and have a first scene that's like Lord of the Rings explaining the whole history of the ring, or the Star Wars opening crawl, or even the way Severance eventually explains the Severance procedure later. It's a very direct info dump. Yes, they do it with character and with style, but just do what you gotta do for your scene to work. And really, that's part of the same whole lesson that we're explaining here. This is all part of simplifying the structure so that the audience does not feel lost in that first scene, but feels invited on a clear, easy path into your story. Okay, so that is all I have to say about this opening as far as the lessons it offers and learning how to write first scenes. I'm hoping the central allegory of the flagship, that'll make it a lot easier to implement than having like a bunch of little ideas that are all separate and hard to remember. Okay, so the point I want to end on here is an aspect of the scene that would be great in any scene, not just a first scene. It is especially good as part of Sampler Plate, but it's just so good I have to talk about it, and it frames all of what we're talking about very nicely. The aspect of the scene which still just blows my mind is that the emotional dynamics are just wild. The fact that just the survey alone takes Helly through all these different emotions, and it's not just dynamics like happy to sad to happy to sad, it's nuanced emotions like we said before, incredulity, anxiety, all these different types of confusion and horror, and that by the end, someone who is so gung-ho and empowered only seconds before is rendered into a meek little fraidy cat. But this is where we see that it's not just what Severance is on like a factual level, but why it is. That by disconnecting you from your identity and your connections, that makes you susceptible to control. And this early on, you do not need to know about why that is. You can feel that that's true. And that is what the story is really going to be about. The power dynamic between identity and control, but in a way and explored to a level of depth you've probably never experienced before. That truly is Severance's flagship. Okay, we'll stop here. Subscribe if you like the content. Consider supporting the channel on Patreon. Shout out to new high tier patrons Jameson, Dusk, and Danielle M. And huge thank you as always to all the patrons. In the group discussions that we do every month, we actually had one of those about this scene. Thank you to everyone who participated in that. That was super helpful to me. So I originally was going to make 3 Severance videos about the first episode, one about the first frame, which I already did, and then one about the first scene, which is this video, and then one more about the first episode as a whole. And to be honest, I kind of talked about some of that third video stuff in this video, so I'm going to leave it at 2 videos. That doesn't mean I'm not going to make any more Severance videos. I may make more in the future, but content plans for the next few months in general are kind of up in the air. And on that note, I'll ask anything you guys want to see. I have my ideas for right now, but I'm open to yours as well. Feel free to leave a comment. That's all I got for now. Hope you all enjoyed, and thanks for watching.